This is Swarfcast. I'm Noah Graff. I am very honored to be with Julie Klinger, Associate Professor at UW Madison and geographer. She's also the author of Rare Earth Frontiers, From Terrestrial Subsoils to Lunar Landscapes. Welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Let's talk rare earths.
Let's talk rare earths. It it just seemed like I'm a big believer in serendipity. If people listen to the show a lot, they'll know. And it just seemed like lots of things converged together. I just started hearing about it in the news, and then there was the deal, and I started being interested in investing in rare earths at the same time. Um, I actually haven't, but I bought a ETF for uranium, which it's not exactly the same, but I think it's sort of in the same world. Maybe I'll ask you about that. So just to get started, I want just the 3 minute bio of what exactly you do, why you can enlighten our listeners. Our listeners are people in the machining industry. People do listen all over the world, but I'd say maybe 80% are in the United States. And I think it really does affect them, maybe directly, maybe slightly indirectly. And I just find it really interesting. So um, that's why I just thought, oh, she sounds interesting. Let's bring her on. So tell me, I mean, I'm curious what a geographer is, and it sounds like you actually teach about a lot of interesting things. But give me just the brief background, and then we'll dive in.
All right, awesome. Okay, so I'm a geographer, and there's a lot of different things that geographers do, from using satellites to make maps to doing kind of muddy boots field work and everything in between. The short and sweet summary is that geography studies the why of where, right? Why things happen where they happen. And so when it comes to rare earth elements and why they are mined, where they are mined, turns out it has less to do with geological determinism because rare earth elements are not that rare. They're relatively ubiquitous in the Earth's crust. But they are difficult to mine, complicated to separate, often coincide with radioactive materials. So that brings in a whole host of other
All right.
complications. And so that helps explain why the geography of rare earth mining and processing actually over the latter 20th century and first part of the 21st century concentrated in China. Um,
Okay, Julie, I'm gonna have to interrupt you here.
mhm.
I need you to take a step back now for the people who don't know that much about rare earths, me included. I want a rare earths 101.
All right, here we
And
go.
then we can dig deeper, okay? So,
Awesome.
what the heck is a rare earth? I've read your stuff and you say rare earths aren't actually rare, nor are they earths, which is a great quote. Um, what the heck are rare earths?
All right. So the straightforward definition, rare earths refers to 17 chemically similar elements on the periodic table, elements 57 to 71, plus scandium and yttrium. And so we're talking about 17 different elements that do 17 different things and have 17 different chemical properties and atomic structures. But as a group, the reason that people tend to talk to them together, one is historical and one actually has to do with their applications. Collectively, they share these fantastic magnetic and conductive properties. So they're really useful also as alloys. And that I think directly connects rare earths with the world of most of your listeners because they're used to make
Sure.
machinery, technology lighter, faster, stronger, brighter. It's used as signal amplifiers, temperature resistance, and we can get into details and specific examples if you want. But basically, they are kind of like the way that others have described them is that they're kind of like spice metals, right? You add a little bit of a certain rare earth element to glass or iron or steel alloy, and it does different things. It enables different things. And so I think if you start to kind of pull on this thread and look around the machining and manufacturing world, you'd be harder pressed to find a piece of equipment that contains zero, right?
Very
Rare
cool.
elements, even
So,
if it's just a very small amount.
all right, give us a rundown. I mean, I've heard iPhones, but I tell us some of the things that this secret spice goes into.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll start right out the gate with correcting, I think, a misperception, which is that they're primarily used in renewable energy technologies. They are, but they are in fact used in some form in every kind of energy generation. So, for example, lanthanum and cerium are used as catalysts in petroleum refining. Gadolinium, another rare earth element, is used in alloys that are used. I'm sorry, gadolinium, another rare earth element, is used in alloys that are used to produce nuclear reactors. For example, they're used as alloys in welding electrodes. So, one example, lanthanated tungsten. Lanthanated refers to lanthanum, element 57, which is, the leader of the rare earth family, and that's used for arc stability. And there's just so many examples. And so I think the kind of bigger takeaway here is that, now that we're all kind of talking about supply chains and all of this, we might be looking at our equipment and realizing that it has a geography that connects us to different places like China and beyond.
What's the lowest hanging fruit? I mean, I've heard iPhones, cars. Um, Basically, you're saying everything interesting,
Pretty much. I
technological.
mean, lasers, optical fibers, stainless steel, you know,
And so,
medical.
if without it, we're screwed.
Well, no, it's not that we're screwed. It's just that I think that's an easy conclusion to make.
Okay.
They are really important for a number of high performance, high efficiency applications. Um, Without them, things maybe would be less efficient or high performing.
Okay.
Um, but for the past, especially for the last 15 years or so, given a whole host of concerns around supply chain and the environmental impacts and, how disruptive it might be to lose access to rare earth elements, there have been all sorts of efforts in different sectors, public and private, to find substitution or to make, say, rare earth-free batteries or
Interesting.
free magnets. And there's breakthroughs here and there. But a lot of them haven't actually scaled because, for the most part, the primary supplier of rare earth elements to the rest of the world is a pretty reliable trade partner. That's China. And the reason China's, generally speaking, a pretty reliable trade partner is because there's a lot of businesses in China that would be pissed if
Well,
actually they couldn't export to the rest of the world.
so it's what it sounds a little bit like is you're talking about like the way we saw oil in, 20 years ago. It maybe there's a way to do it without it, but we've got these countries that are importing it, and we feel like we're helpless without them, particularly people who are thinking short term. Is this sort of an interesting analogy?
Yeah, I think so. That is an interesting analogy. I mean, it's a little bit different just in terms of scale because the depth of oil dependence and entrenched oil and gas interests kind of stifling innovation away from that is much bigger, much more organized than rare earth elements. But with that qualification, the analogy holds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but they're both very political now. Um, if they turned off the spigot for rare earths, if China just said no more rare earths for you, um, would we be paralyzed, or would there be some sort of backdoor and we could get it from one other place in the world and bring it here, or there'd be I don't know. I know they're talking about Australia. They're talking about what would happen if he just if Xi just said, "Sorry guys, I'm playing hardball."
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting question because after the April export restrictions from China, the Financial Times ran a headline which I think sums it up perfectly, which is that that was China's export restrictions were effectively a gift to Western industry because it drives the price up, which actually makes it economically viable under current conditions for firms outside of China to get into the game.
Yes.
And I think tellingly, in the past couple of days when the US and China reached what's called a truce on rare earth elements, the stock for US companies nosedived, right? So what would happen if China were to turn off the spigot? I think prices would go up. I think that would create a lot of new investment opportunity for folks who have been trying to get in the game outside of China. But then in terms of like the actual uses and applications, it does take time for a change in the flow of materials to actually be materially felt across the supply chain.
Hmm.
Right. So to give you an example from a different sector, say diamonds, if, for example, there are export restrictions that no diamonds can be exported from this particular place because of their role in conflict, it would still take about 2 years for essentially the last shipment that left that place to work its way all the way through the supply chain.
And how much of a backlog do we have in these earths that are not rare nor
Rare,
earth?
no earths. It's hard to know. It's really hard to know because data is stylized at best. My research team has spent a number of years really scrutinizing the best available trade data for rare earth elements, and we find that, because of the way that things are grouped together, as well as the ease with which rare earth exports or imports can be simply reported as something else, that it's actually really difficult to bring with any degree of confidence, like what the import and export data says, like together with
Well, and it's
material.
so many different things. It's not like oil, which is like, you know, this is it's pretty it's much more simple or other things because there's 17 of them and
Right. Or it leaves China like not in a bag of, refined rare earth elements, but it leaves China in the form of, technology components or even finished goods. And so, when we're interested in kind of understanding what the total material flow of these things might be, it very quickly becomes a question of actually how much stuff is moving around the world in total, and then statistically, what percentage of that stuff might be rare earth elements, right? Um,
right.
yeah,
It's interesting. It's
to take
all
you into the research weeds with me a little bit, right?
just quickly before we go back into like supply chains, et cetera. Um, Stuff going on in the news literally today. Today is I'm looking at my calendar. It's October 30th, and the big negotiator went in and made some deals to for these rare earths. Lord knows if he and his negotiating team really understand it. I'm sure they have a lot more research at their fingertips than we do. But um, I'd like to know what you know about this deal. And first, what did they tell us? And then what do you think it means?
Okay, yeah. So, most recently, well, on October 28th, so just a few days ago, just a few days ago from this recording, Trump and Japan's Prime Minister, they signed a joint US-Japan framework for, quote, liquid, diversified, and fair markets for critical minerals and rare earths,
Right.
including possible stockpiling or co-investment. And so with Australia, there was also like a larger kind of critical mineral rare earths framework that was signed earlier in the month. And that involved a joint commitment to mining and processing projects.
Was that to give us leverage with China so we could go and say, hey, we're working with Australia too, so don't be too mean to us?
I mean, maybe, but here's the thing. Um, about 14 years ago, in one of China's, I think it was in China's 12th five-year plan or what have you, they articulated a strategy to move away from, the first steps in the rare earth supply chain, so mining and primary separations, and in order to, increase their value-added processing. And that was part of the kind of Made in China 2025 tech innovation visions that they've been pursuing for over a decade. And so, even though it's couched in competitive language, diversifying the global geography of rare earth mining and processing is actually a shared objective between the West and China. It's very seldom talked about that way. But just to
It,
kind of,
it, sorry. It originally, so China became dominant with the rare earths because we didn't feel like processing them because it was dirty and is that how it got over there? I know we're skipping around.
yeah, that's a big part of the story. Mining and processing is expensive to do in jurisdictions that, place any sort of value on occupational health and safety
So
and
it's not that we don't have them. We do have them,
absolutely.
essentially.
Yeah. Um, and uh and so, firms that had been active in the West subcontracted their operations to firms in China over the 1980s and 1990s. And this fit hand in glove with China's strategy to attract foreign direct investment in several strategic sectors, including rare earth elements. So they rolled out the red carpet, offering cheaper labor and lack of enforcement on
I got
environmental
you.
regulations and all of
Okay.
that
So
kind of
they so
enticement.
they have the rare earths and the processing. And now what did we do to try to because they it sounds like they don't like some of the things we're doing with tariffs or policies and so what did we go to the table to try to do?
Most recently, or
Yeah.
yeah,
Or
okay.
yeah.
So in a way, it's interesting to kind of accompany this long term because the US restricted the export of the most advanced chips and related technology to China because of their potential, quote, dual use applications, meaning they can also be used in weapon systems. And so in China's more recent export restrictions of rare earth elements to the United States, they used the exact same language that they were restricting the export of elements and components that have quote unquote dual use applications.
Hmm.
And so that is just kind of one example of what has been, China's policy strategy around rare earth elements because they have to balance a couple things, and it's important to keep those couple things in mind. One, um, the you know, uh, China's strengths in rare earth processing and particularly value-added processing and technology manufacturing, that represents a whole universe of business interests, many of which are also joint ventures, right, that were built up over time with counterparts in the West. And so for China to make a political move to say, you know what, these things can't be exported, that then immediately riles up a whole, like I said, a whole universe of business interests that are like, now what?
Hmm.
Maybe we'll leave. Maybe we'll leave China. Maybe we'll move our operations outside of China. And
Ah.
that's not good news for China because
So
that
it
means
backfires by
jobs.
them being by them being clever, then it in a way backfires on them too.
Well, I think that kind of explains why they've been much more measured. in their responses and in their export controls than I think is typically represented. If
Interesting.
you actually read the text of the licensing requirements of the export controls or what have you, there's not a single part of that text that deviates from what already exists in some sort of national policy, reciprocal policy, or even international standard. That's the interesting thing. And I think one of the reasons it's so measured is one, there's a larger political calculation in terms of not wanting to really not wanting to be a provocateur, right? Because I think if we can say anything about China's government, it's that their primary commitment is actually to economic stability, domestically and globally. Because if you lose that, then the party themselves, they lose quite a lot of legitimacy domestic, right? And so there's the measured conservatism around the policy side on China's part, and then there's also the the real political economy aspect of needing to negotiate with their business constituents that are located domestically within China.
Very interesting. That's it. But I mean, and I think that goes to this whole people try to make a zero-sum game out of the negotiation. You know, we win, they lose. Back to our listeners, looking at the current geopolitics, the current deal, maybe your predictions of what's going to happen based on, you know, what you see, who's mining more and who's got potential, et cetera. What do our listeners need to think about?
Interesting. Um, well, I'll say first, right off the bat, it's I have gotten the feedback from folks who don't work primarily with mining or geopolitics, like, oh God, we have to worry about rare earth elements now too. Don't we have enough to worry about?
Yeah,
But so I think along those lines, I would like to offer a little bit of reassurance, which is that as someone, what I've seen accompanying this issue since the late aughts is that the inertia of international trade and business interests, aside from a couple of incidents, that inertia keeps material flowing. And there are interests on all sides that want to keep material flowing. Sellers in China don't want to have their product parked, and buyers in the rest of the world don't want to like end up in a situation where they can't source material. And so what we've seen, my research team, we look at a whole bunch of different mineral and metal commodities in addition to rare earth elements. And so what we've seen globally is that when there is a limit or a restriction on imports or exports, that creates an opportunity for, let's say, entrepreneurial actors to connect sellers and buyers.
sure.
And so, and often, the degree of disruption can really only be assessed in retrospect. When you compare reported exports with reported imports among trade partners. Um, but the other thing too is to say that there have been these long-term efforts to look at like diversifying even our alloys or our lasers or our batteries away from rare earth elements, right? To kind of
Interesting.
like material science, you can think of it in lots of different ways, but one of the distinguishing features of material science is, we're working our way through the periodic table, seeing what stuff will do in different combinations if we put it together in novel ways. And so, under the kind of 20th century research, development, investment, globalization frameworks, that was a more open environment really fostered or at least didn't disincentivize the complexification of manufacturing equipment, right? So like, oh, what happens if I add just a tiny bit of these 15 different elements? Like, wow, it does this cool thing. Because those materials were easily available, there really wasn't a disincentive for that kind of complexification. Or maybe arguably in a new era or several years into a new era where simplification might be the new virtue for
So,
material science. So, Yeah.
Very so interesting. Well, what can go faster? Us come up with a different way to um, make stuff without the rare earths, or us to figure out a way to refine those rare earths cleanly?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I would say that a lot of folks have already figured out the first one. It's just that their technologies or their ideas haven't scaled because, for the most part, the trade in rare earths is pretty stable, right? And so that's another way to kind of look at any potential crisis. If China decides to withhold indefinitely rare earth elements or technological components or what have you, that then would actually create the urgency and the mandate to deploy a lot of these discoveries that have occurred over the last 15 years at scale.
It's so amazing how all these things you oh they're gonna hold it away, hold it back from us, and then it causes you to actually get better or make, we won't give them our AI. They come up with a better AI. You
Yeah.
know, they, oh, they're holding us hostage with oil. All right, let's get our own oil. Let's get our own natural gas. They told Kareem Abdul-Jabbar he couldn't dunk in college because he was dominating too much, so he developed the hook shot. It's
Hmm.
just, yeah, sometimes the better way is to just say, all right, whatever, keep your rare earths. Or maybe we'll develop them ourselves. It sounds like what you're saying is there's going to be a little bit of both. Us getting rare earths ourselves, processing them ourselves, and then also just learning how to not use them.
Yeah, I think it's such a they're used in so many different ways. And there are so many different approaches to achieving supply chain security that actually, to greater or lesser degrees of coordination, people are working on this from whatever their particular corner might be, right? If they're a battery specialist at a national lab, or if they're in the startup investment space, or anywhere else in between. It is kind of an all of the above type situation, which, if you zoom way out and kind of look at what are the conditions that lead to greater innovation, greater supply chain security, et cetera, it's having this whole multitude of approaches, substitution, um, innovation away from these materials, as well as figuring out how to source them closer to home.
Very interesting. All right, let's I I know you've talked a little bit about um moon stuff, moon rock. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know nothing about that, and I didn't expect to find that in when I was doing a little bit of homework. What do you know about moon resources? Are we actually using stuff from the moon?
Oh, yeah. So not on Earth, we're not actually using stuff from the moon outside of, scientific and like maybe collectors items or what have you. Um, so for a while, in the early 2010s, the threat of China monopolizing rare earth elements proved expedient for investment in startup interests outside of China in a different way, which is that it supported drumming up a lot of investment for different space startup companies to develop a mining robot to extract rare earth elements from the moon. So, a couple of things we know. We know that among many other elements or materials that are found on Earth, rare earth elements are also found on the moon. This makes sense given the theory of, the moon and the Earth once being a single planetary body. Makes sense that their geology would be similar as well.
Interesting.
Um, the other thing though is that rare earth elements, the price point is so persistently low that it's hard enough for companies on Earth to get up and going and make a go of it. That the proposition that rare earth elements would be mined on the moon and then effectively imported to Earth for use in terrestrial markets is it's just an economic non-starter.
Right, because as you said, they're really not cheap to get. They're just cheap to process.
Well, they're not, I mean, and the market price is persistently low for these things, given how complex they are to process, right? And that's a legacy of China's like long-term dominance in the supply chain, right? So the other thing though that I want to mention with
So
respect
they're expensive or they're not expensive?
they are so when you say expensive, are you talking about the price specifically, or are you talking about like the social and environmental cost?
I guess I wasn't thinking about those costs. I was thinking
Oh
about
yeah.
money.
No, I mean there have been a few blips over the past 15, 20 years where the rare earth price spikes, but it invariably comes back down.
And right now it's not that high, or right now it is high because of all the hubbub.
It's higher than average right now because of all the hubbub. But that's still not quite at a price point where it's viable for a firm in, say, North America or Northern or Western Europe to really make a go of it without really heavy state support.
Interesting.
And the issue there is not only are rare earth elements like not rare on the Earth's crust, but we have actually kind of a chronic oversupply problem. And here's why. When you are going to develop a rare earth deposit, chances are you are encountering likely 16 of the 17 rare earth elements there.
Okay.
And in order, and they have to be refined and separated out in order. So that means the lighter rare earth elements that are, lanthanum and cerium, closer to 57, 58, 59, 60 on the periodic table. Um, Even if what you're after is the heavier stuff like terbium and dysprosium, which are the sort of higher numbers on the periodic table, you have to refine and separate out the lanthanum and the cerium and all of that before you can get to the heavies. And so just by virtue of the refining process, you're creating these volumes of individual rare earth elements for which there are not actually sufficient buyers. And so what does that mean? That means that is often hidden in that a lot of that material is just dumped on site, right? Either at the mining site or the beneficiation stage or the refining stage. It's just sort of thrown out with the rest of the separations waste because
Because it's
to
just
max
too much.
right, to maximize efficiency would yeah, would flood the market. I mean,
I
I'll
didn't
just
realize they all came out at the same time. I thought, maybe in this corner of the mountain you found this one, but you're saying they're all kind of bunched together and you have to separate them.
yeah, that's one of the tricky things about rare earths kind of as a family. And so that's a long way to
That's
answer
interesting.
that they are actually so they're not like gold or platinum group metals or anything like that, which, they have those metals have much higher price points. Um, Rare earths are just persistently at an inconveniently low price point. And so if they were to be mined from the moon, I think the only use or circumstance under which that would make any sense is if they were going to be used in outer space
Hmm.
for outer space purposes, right? Like 3D printed into technology components to support deep space exploration or something. Like that's interesting. That's cool. That's small scale, and that maybe ultimately makes space exploration more sustainable.
But I mean, they are somewhat more expensive because of supply and demand, but it's just a few of them that are in lower supply, so they cost more.
Yeah, so like I mentioned dysprosium, for example, and that's used in a number of high performance alloys.
So
Uh,
that is expensive.
it's more expensive than lanthanum and cerium. And the only reason, right, the only reason, or I'm sorry, the primary reason, because there are multiple, the primary reason that it is more expensive is because there are more steps, more refining steps that you have to go through to actually get the dysprosium. You've got to separate out the other rare earth elements that precede it first to actually get to the dysprosium. So there's a
Very
premium on it
interesting.
for that purpose.
Before we just conclude, I'm really into serendipity, and I try to ask. Yeah, I'm actually starting a YouTube channel about serendipity. I'm always talking about it. Can you think of a time in your life where this is kind of unrelated? You could relate it to geopolitics and history as far as something serendipitous, or can you think of something in your own life where it was just something serendipitous that happened that was really important? Maybe you met your spouse, maybe you found your career, maybe one thing led to another and was sort of magical.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. There's so many ways to answer that, but I'll link it to I'll link it back to rare earths, which is
Sure.
simply that how I ended up focusing on rare earths was also, serendipitous in a lot of ways. I had designed this whole research project looking at investment and disinvestment in the iron and steel sector, to do a kind of comparison between China and the US and Brazil, looking at like where investment is going and what places are deindustrializing and all of that. And it was during preliminary research for that in China in 2010 that I met a high-level official and talked about my whole project. And he said, "Yes, that's all very interesting, but have you considered looking at rare earth elements?" Um,
Had you heard of rare earths?
in passing,
Yeah.
in passing. And this co and really only in English. This conversation was happening in Mandarin, so
You speak Mandarin?
I'm fluent in Mandarin. I lived in China for 5 years between 2003 and 2013. So that's one of
Wow.
the reasons that I was like able to do this research and write the book and read China's policy pronouncements, the official documents in Mandarin.
More serendipity. Okay,
Right.
so
And
tell me more.
well, that's kind of the long and the short of it. I had unwittingly, but looking exclusively at iron and steel industry dynamics in China, I had chosen, based on desk research sitting in California, to go to Baotou and Bayan because it was also a historic iron mining and steel manufacturing place. And so this official, he said, if you want to go to Baotou, the rare earth capital of the world, and not research rare earths, it's like, I don't think anyone's going to believe you or even talk to you. So maybe you should look at rare earths. And, so I followed up on that bit of advice, and it happened to follow some like to be kind of during the same multi-week period where there had been some unrest in Inner Mongolia and China around rare earth mining and land use grievances. Brazil's president at the time, Dilma Rousseff, had called for mining multinationals to prospect for rare earth elements in the Amazon. And there were all of these pieces. Um, Also, everyone had just seen Avatar, and so I feel like there was like a broader public
I
appetite
was thinking
for
about the
rare earth,
same thing with
you know?
wait, what is it called? The element in Avatar?
Oh, unobtainium, right?
Unobtainium.
And so I thought, well, okay. I kind of checked in with myself, checked in with my advisors, like, do I have the wherewithal to become an expert in this whole other thing? Well, you have to follow the research questions where they lead. And this was definitely a case of that serendipity, guidance, being kind of in the right place at the right time. And here we are, 15 years later.
On Swarfcast,
Forecast.
you're in the center of your stuff is finally in the center of the news cycle and um do you have anything else you want to say to the world before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think we have a lot more shared interest than differences across the globe, including people in China. And here, who I have in mind are the material scientists, the people who study environmental impacts and want them to become less of a problem, people who want to do things with greater efficiency and greater security. And so I hope that we come back to a place of building on our shared interests, rather than amplifying points of conflict where, as we've talked about, if you actually get into the price and production data, maybe aren't actually points of conflict after all.
Fascinating. All right. Thank you.